Hope you're ready for this. Chris Lowe is a professor of marine biology and director of the Shark Lab at Cal State University, Long Beach. His research, which uses a completely new technology, has focused on the behavior of baby and juvenile white sharks off the Southern California coast. Chris, are you there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so excited to hear about everything that you have to offer. I got a little sneak peek of your presentation the other day when we were testing Zoom, and I think everyone's going to love it. So thank you again for doing this today. We really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to be here.
Sure. So let me tell you a little bit about what we've been doing. So we've been studying white sharks in California for about the last 12 years now, and we've been in collaboration with Monterey Bay Aquarium. And recently we received funding from the state of California to expand that work, mainly because we're seeing a lot more sharks along our beaches, and there's actual concern about public safety. So the story I'm going to tell you about today actually changed my opinion of conservation. We hear bad news all the time about our environment and how all these things that we're doing to the environment are affecting marine organisms. And it was actually recovery of white sharks that got me thinking about our conservation strategies differently, and that they have been working. It's just that they've been working very slowly. So the story I'm going to tell you about today is the dramatic recovery of white sharks and how we think that happened, and what do we know about them and what don't we know about them. So the bottom line is, we think about Shark Week. Well, it's actually in California, it's been Shark Decade. So anybody that's spent any appreciable time on the water knows that in Southern California, in particular during the summer, it is really not that uncommon to see a white shark along the beach. And it's really remarkable because it's been probably over 100 years that white shark populations, and of course, many of their favorite foods, have been impacted. So we've seen this trajectory where, about 100 years ago, white sharks were probably negatively affected by commercial fishing, but not just that, the loss of their primary food, which were marine mammals. So a lot of marine mammal populations, whales, pinnipeds, were all dramatically overhunted by the early 1900s. And of course, adult white sharks are very dependent on them as part of their diet. And juveniles, of course, have been very dependent on stingrays, one of the things that we've learned in Southern California. So what's interesting is that we see this pattern where in the 70s, marine mammals were protected. So we see marine mammal populations start to come back. But white shark populations were still being fished, especially the juveniles in California. And it wasn't until white sharks were protected in 1994 in California, and marine mammals were protected in the early 70s, that we really start to see this pattern of marine mammal population recovery, and then slowly coming behind that, white shark population recovery. And it's literally taken decades. So what do we know about white sharks? Well, 25 years ago, if you'd asked any biologist what kind of shark we thought a white shark was, we would have told you, well, we thought they're a coastal shark. And the reason why we would say that is in the fall months, particularly from November till about February, it would not be uncommon to see adult white sharks along the Central California coast, up off San Francisco, Farallones, Año Nuevo, places like that. And then, of course, places like Guadalupe Island are known for adults. And then recently, Point Conception and the Channel Islands. These are all what we call feeding aggregation sites. So what's drawing these white sharks to these feeding aggregation sites are these. It's the northern elephant seals, which are by far the white shark's favorite food in the Northeast Pacific. So when females come in, they give birth to their young, they're nice and fat and plump, and they're actually an easy target for adult white sharks. These animals are relatively naive, and the white sharks are now queuing in on those times. They show up at these rookeries, and they're taking advantage of this big influx of calories. So what happened was about 20 years ago, my colleagues started tagging white sharks up around the Farallones, Guadalupe Island, and Año Nuevo with satellite transmitters. And then literally our idea of what kind of shark a white shark was changed overnight. Originally, we thought they were coastal sharks, and that was because in the fall, we would see them along the coast, but we didn't know where they left. After the elephant seals disappeared, we just didn't see them. We didn't know if they were just hanging around, but deeper. It wasn't until they started to tag them with satellite tags that we actually learned that white sharks migrate out after the elephant seals leave to this area out in the middle of the Pacific, halfway between Baja and Hawaii. And males will spend about 8 months out there, females about 1.5 years before they will return to one of these feeding aggregation sites, either off the Farallones or Guadalupe Island. So literally overnight, our idea of what kind of shark a white shark was changed. They went from being a coastal shark to actually in the Northeast Pacific, being primarily an oceanic shark, because adults spend far more time in the open ocean than they do along our coast. However, the other thing that we realized was that in the spring, it would not be uncommon for us to see baby white sharks off Southern California beaches, which means females are coming back in April, May, June, those time periods to give birth to their young in Southern California. But we rarely see those big females. We just see the babies showing up. So what we've learned is, based on fisheries data and based on observation data, is that the Southern California bight, that area from Point Conception down to mid-Baja, is a nursery for white sharks in the Northeast Pacific. And we know that because we find babies along our beaches between April and October. In addition, the other thing that we've learned from commercial fishing records going back 100 years, plus a lot of our new science, has shown that there are hotspot areas that these juvenile white sharks use. And I'll talk more about these later, but this area between Santa Barbara and Ventura, Santa Monica Bay, Huntington Beach, Long Beach, Dana Point, these are all areas that we even know from historic fishing records going back 100 years were probably important nursery sites for white sharks. In addition, the other thing that we've learned is that adults typically are found along the central California coast, particularly between November and February, or around the offshore islands off Southern California. But typically we only see juveniles along Southern California beaches. It is really rare for us to see adult white sharks along these areas. And when we do, they're usually moving through. They do not spend time along our beaches. So these patterns of different size animals distributing themselves along the California coast across space and time has kind of evolved over time. We've learned more about this pattern, and as the population's likely grown, we're starting to see more of them. So just to give you some reference, a white shark is born between 4 and about 5 feet long. Female will give birth to anywhere from 2 to 15 babies at a time. Juveniles considered anything between a baby, so 4 feet to about 10 feet. Males are thought to mature somewhere around 10 feet long, maybe 9 feet long, at around 10 or 12 years old. Females, much larger, they're about 12 feet long when they start to mature, and may not be 12 to 14, maybe as old as 18 before they're sexually mature. The largest one on record is probably somewhere around 20 feet long. So you figure anything after 10 feet and 20 feet is considered an adult. So just to kind of give you some idea of sizes, here you can see a baby, here you can see your typical juvenile, here's your typical person in size, your stand-up paddleboarder, and of course an adult white shark. So we know that white sharks were definitely impacted by commercial fishing in California. We had gillnet fisheries that were setting gill nets literally off the beach, out offshore. They were targeting things like offshore, they were targeting swordfish, mako sharks, thresher sharks. Inshore, they were targeting things like California halibut, angel sharks, and white sea bass. So what we can see here down here is the number of nets being set in the different fisheries. The bars that you see indicate the sizes of white sharks caught in those fisheries. So the blue are babies, the red are juveniles, the yellow are adults, and the green are unknowns. So what you can see is that a predominance of the sharks reported caught between the early 1980s and 1995 were predominantly baby white sharks that were caught in these two commercial fisheries that grew very rapidly in the late 70s, kind of peaked in the mid 1980s, and then slowly decreased over time as those fisheries were either heavily regulated or in some cases they overfished to the point where fishers were no longer able to make a living. So what we can see is this peak in white shark being caught in these fisheries. And of course, we know they're underreported because at the time, Department of Fish and Game only was having them record shark. They didn't even have a category for white sharks. So nobody knows exactly how many juvenile white sharks were actually landed. But chances are if you ate fish tacos back between the mid 80s and the early 90s, you had white shark and you probably didn't know it. But what's really interesting is in 1994, even despite the reputation for white sharks to occasionally bite surfers, California had the wherewithal to enact protection for white sharks, mainly because we recognized their importance in the ecosystem and their vulnerability to being overfished. So in 1994, the state of California enacted protection, which made it illegal for fishers to land a white shark. They could not intentionally target them, and they could not land them. And then in addition, also in 1994, largely because of bycatch of marine mammals, birds, and turtles, the voters of California voted to ban the use of gill nets in nearshore waters. So those were nets that were being set from the shoreline out to 3 miles. So after 1994, it was illegal to land white sharks, and nearshore gill nets were banned. So what we can see is after 1994, you can see that gill net fishing still occurs. It occurs outside 3 miles. The gill net fishery has not really increased. If anything, it's slowly decreased over time. But what you can see is starting around 2002, we started to see an increase in the number of sharks being reported caught in the remainder of the fishery. So from 1985 to 2002, we saw an 82% reduction in gill nets being set in California. Yet the catch rates of these juvenile white sharks were going up. So to a biologist, we look at this and we go, okay, that is a sign of increased recruitment. That's a good sign that maybe the population's recovering. But it wasn't just protection from fisheries that likely helped the white shark population rebound. Really, probably one of the most important parts was recovery of their food source. So adults really are using the Southern California coast to take advantage of marine mammals. And it's really pinniped recovery that's fueled this population growth. So many of you are probably aware of the dramatic increase in pinniped populations. So up until the early 1900s, most pinnipeds found in the Northeast Pacific were hunted for fur, oil, or for animal feed. And that was up into the 1920s. California sea lions were simply culled. They were viewed as competitors to commercial fisheries, and fishermen would simply shoot them. Every once in a while, they would land the gonads or something like that for Asian medicines, but by and large, there was no market for California sea lion. It was really many of the other pinnipeds. The historic rookeries largely were off San Francisco Bay, the Northern Channel Islands, Guadalupe Island. Those were the bulk of the pinniped rookeries off the Northeast Pacific. And of course, here's some elephant seals, California sea lions off San Miguel Island, which really is probably one of the largest rookeries in the West Coast right now. So the main species that we have, pinnipeds that we have in the Northeast Pacific that white sharks occasionally can take advantage of, are stellar sea lions, which are now pretty much further up north and are still, numbers are fairly low. Guadalupe fur seals, which have been showing good signs of recovery, northern fur seals, California sea lion, northern elephant seal, and the harbor seals. So what's remarkable is that it was really, regulatory turning points that made such a big difference for these populations. So in the 1920s, California enacted protection for California seals and sea lions. So it prohibited culling. Prior to that, it was happening regularly. Even the state would support the culling programs. But after the 1920s, it was prohibited. In 1972, of course, the Marine Mammal Protection Act was passed federally. And since then, we've seen pretty much all marine mammals, including great whales, have shown pretty remarkable increases, not all, but a vast majority. And in 1994, Prop 132 was put in place to ban nearshore gill nets. And that was largely due to bycatch of marine mammals, which the public found unacceptable. And then, of course, the other part we have to remember is that the Magnuson-Stevens Act, which was originally set up to establish our economic exclusion zone out to 200 miles, was recertified in 1996. And the primary focus of that recertification was to reduce bycatch in commercial fisheries. So even though marine mammals were protected under the Marine Mammal Protection Act, they were still being caught and killed in commercial fisheries as bycatch. So in 1996, the Magnuson-Stevens Act really cracked down on commercial fisheries that had high marine mammal bycatch. So all of these things greatly contributed to recovery of pinniped populations. So if we take a look at some of these, they're just astounding. Most biologists shake their heads at the recovery that we've seen for many of these populations. So northern elephant seal populations were hunted down to some believe as many as 16 that were left on Guadalupe Island by the early 1900s. And now we're somewhere around maybe 190,000 in the Northeast Pacific. California sea lion has shown really dramatic increases. By the early 1900s, it was assumed that there might have been as few as 2,000 left. Now, population estimates may be as high as 320,000. And then, of course, the harbor seals, their populations have kind of come up and plateaued. Even sea otters have shown pretty remarkable recovery. Although they haven't fully moved down throughout their full range, we have seen a pretty substantial increase down to point conception over the last 50 years. So all of these animals have shown pretty remarkable recoveries. And remember, many of these pinniped are important food sources for white sharks, northern elephant seals, of course, being the favorite. So there's still a lot we don't know about white sharks. For example, a question I get all the time is how many are out there, or how many are off California? And the simple answer is we don't know. A lot of biologists have attempted to come up with population estimates. They're very difficult to count. They range thousands of miles every year, and their movement patterns are not fully understood, so it's very difficult to come up with good population estimates. Best estimates are somewhere around 3,000, maybe as high as 4,000 in the whole Northeast Pacific. Why do certain juveniles pick certain beaches? This is a big question that we're trying to answer here, because when they show up at somebody's beach, it causes all sorts of havoc and a media stir. And of course, lifeguards are concerned for public safety. And of course, when they do show up at that beach, what are they doing there? Because they will be there for months at a time. And when they switch from beach to beach, from one year to the next, can we predict what beach they're going to show up next and why? So the question that everybody wants to know is, with a rising white shark population, does this pose an increased threat to beachgoers? And if so, to what degree? So these are things that we've been trying to figure out and work on in the Shark Lab. So I'm going to try to give you a little bit about what we have learned. So one of the things that we have noticed in the last 20 years is that, at least for juvenile white sharks, nurseries are popping up. And typically when you see one baby white shark, you're going to see more than one. So here's an aerial photograph taken off Santa Monica Bay. Those are 2 stand-up paddle boarders that you see there. And in the same frame are 5 juvenile white sharks. The most that we've seen in any given overflight was 14 in an area the size of maybe 3 football fields. And literally PCH is just off screen here. So this aggregation, this little mini aggregation of 3 sharks, that's about as close as you'll see them get. So they kind of like to be in a group, but they don't like to be too close. So we're not really sure why. We think there is some social component to it, but we're not really sure what that is. So we refer to these as nursery schools. In order to answer some of these questions, we're using a variety of technologies. And just like the technologies that my colleagues use to figure out that white sharks adults make these offshore migrations in the winter, we're using the same technology on juveniles in Southern California. So one type of tag that we use are called spot tags. These are satellite transmitters that get bolted to the shark's dorsal fin. And every time the fin breaks the surface, this is a radio transmitter. That radio transmitter transmits and can be detected by satellites in orbit, which then can get a latitude and longitude, and then send me an email with a latitude, longitude, time and date, and the ID number of that shark. The minute that shark goes underwater and the transmitter goes beneath the surface, it can no longer transmit, turns off. So the only time we get detections are when the fin is out of the water. Now, white sharks are not marine mammals. They do not have to come to the surface to breathe. So when we started tagging them with this very expensive technology, we really didn't expect to get a lot of information. What we do get in some cases are really accurate geopositions, really accurate latitudes and longitudes. But what do you do if they don't come to the surface? So we use another type of transmitter. Those are called pop-off archiving satellite transmitters, PAT tags. These get darted into the shark's back. This transmitter has a light sensor, a temperature sensor, and a depth sensor, and a mini computer. And the mini computer is logging light, temperature, and depth every 30 seconds. And then we can program this at a pre-described time and date to pop off the shark, float to the surface, and then while it's bobbing away at the surface, it uploads all the data to the satellites. The satellites then download it to my office. So we can kind of see where that shark has traveled. So it gives us some indication of where the shark's been, particularly the temperature and depth that it's been, but the geolocation isn't very accurate. It's about 60 nautical miles. So in that case, we could either have a shark that's literally right on Long Beach, or it could be in Compton. So it's not nearly as accurate as a spot tag, but it's getting data even when the shark's underwater. However, if we really want to tell how close a shark might get to a beach, we use this third type technology called an acoustic transmitter. Now, acoustic transmitters, instead of using radio waves, are using sound. And sound transmits really well underwater. So if we catch one of these baby white sharks or a juvenile, we can flip that shark upside down, put it in tonic immobility, and we can surgically implant acoustic transmitter. It has a unique ID code, and that transmitter lasts 10 years. Now, when that shark, we release it, swimming around, when it swims within 300 yards of one of our underwater acoustic receivers, the acoustic receiver will log the time, the date, and the ID number. So these are literally 100 yards off the beach. So when these sharks swim, now we can't catch all the sharks that we see. So sometimes what we can do is we can swim up to them or drive up alongside them in a boat, and we can dart an acoustic transmitter in their back, much like a pat tag. So again, this gives the ability to tag sharks in different ways because different size sharks have to be handled differently. The last type of tag that I'll talk more about later, we call a smart tag. So think of this like a Fitbit for sharks. So if we catch the shark, this gets clamped on its dorsal fin like a little backpack. And I'll talk a little bit more about what this special tag can do. But you can see since 2006, we've had the opportunity to tag a lot of juvenile white sharks in Southern California. So we're really starting to be able to answer some of the questions that I outlined earlier. Now, getting access to sharks is always a challenge. So typically, commercial fishers that are fishing outside 3 miles using gill nets, we have a partnership with, and many of them, if they catch a baby white shark, they'll call us up. My students and I will race down and meet the fishermen at the dock. They have large live wells that they have the shark in. We can then process the shark. We can take it out, we can measure it, we can take tissue samples, blood samples, we can fit it with all different types of transmitters, take the shark out and let it go. So that's one way that we can get access to sharks. For bigger sharks, what we can do is literally drive up alongside them with a boat, and we can dart either a pop-off satellite tag into the shark or an acoustic transmitter into the shark. In some, we can do both. So it's just literally like getting your ear pierced. You know, they'll do a little flinch when you dart them, but basically the shark just kind of keeps swimming, and usually we have an opportunity to get another dart in or even take a muscle biopsy. The other way that we've learned to catch these sharks, because a lot of times they're very, very close to the beach, so close that we can't get a larger boat in. So by using a Lifeguard jet ski, what we can do is put a piece of gill net right in front of the shark. So we're either using a drone or a helicopter to spot to tell us where the shark is. We lay this 100-foot stretch of gill net right in front of the shark, and then the shark swims into it and quickly gets entangled. We can then pull that net back to the boat, untangle the shark, put it in a water bath, and process it just the same way we would if we got it from a commercial fisherman. So this is a great method, but it does require a lot of coordination. And again, sometimes we're in 3 feet of water. Now, jab tagging from the back of a jet ski is by far one of my grad students' favorite. As you can see, they're on a tow board. We have a spotter telling the jet ski operator where the shark is. They can literally roll into the water, and then we can dart a tag in the shark's back. So we have these aggregations of the sharks right off the beaches. And using this method, we can tag 6 sharks in 2 hours. So right now, that student is standing. That gives you an idea how deep the water was that he just tagged that 4-foot-long juvenile white shark. So one of the other things that we've learned about white sharks in terms of their temperature sensitivity is that all white sharks are endothermic, which means they have internalized red muscle. And as long as they are swimming, their internal muscle is creating heat. And then by using countercurrent heat exchange blood flow, they can actually retain heat. So a white shark is considered endotherm. It can keep its body warmer than the water that it moves through. Now, if you touched one, it would be cold to the touch. But if you stuck a thermometer into its body, you would see its temperature rise. Babies are just like the adults. They have all the same equipment. However, their bodies are so small, we don't think they're very good at retaining that heat. So one of the things that we learned back in 2007, when we were tagging these juvenile white sharks with the PAT tags that have the temperature and the light and the depth sensor, was that we could track them for about 5 or 6 months using this method. So I'm going to show you an animation. This is a shark that was tagged off Ventura in 2007. It was about 5 feet long. And what you're going to see is a date counter up here. You're going to see the water temperature change. That's the sea surface temperature. And then this gray-black smudge, the shark is somewhere in the middle of that smudge. So now what you can see is here we are in July. The water temperature is fairly warm up here in Southern California, up off LA. Now the shark starts moving down, and when we get to October, you can see the water start turning more green-blue. It's cooling down. This seems to be a cue that generates this migration of these sharks. And pretty much every juvenile white shark that we tagged during the summer showed this behavior. So by February, this tag pops off, and this shark is now off an area called Vizcaino Bay, which is, by the way, one of the important gray whale nursery habitats in Scammons Lagoon is located there. So we had pretty much most of our juvenile white sharks that we tagged during the summer do this behavior, where we tag them, they'd hang out along Southern California, and then when our water temperatures dip below 60 degrees, that would initiate a migration down to Vizcaino Bay, and then usually around February, the tags would pop off. Now, we had an opportunity to do a really interesting experiment. In 2008, Monterey Bay Aquarium had caught a juvenile white shark off Ventura, taken it up to Monterey Bay Aquarium, and kept it on exhibit there in the aquarium for 5 months. And that shark gained 100 pounds in 5 months. It was the best fed animal probably on the entire West Coast. But the aquarium was getting a little nervous because it was eyeing its tank mates. So they decided to release it in February in Monterey. And many of you know how cold the water is up there. So here's our black smudge, here's our date counter. As you can see, they don't like cold water. They can tolerate it, but they don't like it. Those sharks that were released in Monterey came all the way down off Mazatlan. And then in April, see this slug of warm water starts actually driving the shark up into the Sea of Cortez, up into the Gulf of California. And then by June, just before the tag popped off, when the sea surface temperature was over 84 degrees, we see that the shark is hanging out at a depth of about 150 feet, where the water temperature is really about 70 degrees. So then the tag pops off. So this information is really important, because what it showed us was that these juvenile white sharks don't like water too cold, and they don't like water too warm. It's not that they can't tolerate it, they just don't like it. And it influences their movement patterns. So this was a really important little experiment that helped us understand how temperature sensitive at least the juveniles are. Oh, playing that again. So back to our acoustic receivers. So we have acoustic receivers that range all the way from Morro Bay, all the way along Southern California, particularly through these hotspot areas around the Northern Channel Islands and around Catalina Island. So we are partnered with the Northern Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary, and they're our partners with this research. And then we have collaborators that also have acoustic receivers from Monterey Bay, Santa Cruz, all the way down to Vizcaino Bay and Guadalupe Island. So we basically have the ability to monitor white shark migration along the coast across thousands of miles. So it's because of these collaborations, and our collaborators are using the same technology that enable us to share data on different animals being detected. So right now, by the way, we have a bunch of receivers up off here. I'll show you some of those data in a minute, which is enabling us to track animals along this part of the coast, which we think is going to be more important in the future. So the next animation I'm going to show you was something that happened in 2015, which was the year that we had a strong El Nino. So if you remember, I told you that pretty much every baby white shark that we tagged in Southern California in the summer migrated south to Vizcaino Bay in the winter when our water temperatures dipped below 60 degrees. But in 2015 and 2016, we had a strong El Nino coinciding with the blob. And our water temperatures never dipped below 65 degrees during the winter. So what you're going to see here are flashes, the flashes and the time date counter here. Those are detections of baby white sharks that we have been tagging and tracking during the summer. And what you can see is that they hopscotch from one hotspot area to another, and then from one area to another. So we see this movement back and forth. And as this date goes on, you're going to see us get to October, you're going to see us get to November and December, and all the way through the winter, none of the sharks left. So up until that point, this pattern had suddenly changed. And what this told us was that if the water's warm enough in Southern California in the winter, baby white sharks will stay, which means there has to be adequate food resources. It's really the colder temperature that appears to be a migration driver for these juveniles. So the other thing that we found based on our acoustic transmitters is that from one year to the next, there'll be hotspot areas. So Santa Monica Bay is a hotspot area, and that ranges from Malibu all the way over to Palos Verdes. So here are all locations we had acoustic receivers. And what was really interesting is in 2009 to 2011, the only place we detected baby white sharks was in this very narrow strip along Wilt Rogers Beach. So from 2009 to 2011, every summer, the juveniles would show up these spots. They would be there using maybe a mile stretch of beach, just cruising back and forth, back and forth. but we never detected them in any other parts of the bay. Then, for whatever reason, in 2012 to 2014, we only detected them between Redondo and El Segundo. We didn't detect them up here. So why did the sharks shift from one area of Santa Monica Bay to another? So this is still something we don't fully understand. As you can imagine, lifeguards kind of get freaked out when you have 20 juvenile white sharks hanging out off your beach and you have thousands of people in the water. What do you do about that? So being able to predict where these sharks will show up based possibly on environmental conditions or food is something that we're trying to figure out now. So what do we know about white sharks off the south central coast? This is your stretch of the coastline. So one of our hypotheses is that as the white shark population has been growing, places like the Farallones and Año Nuevo, which historically were important adult white shark feeding areas, are probably getting too crowded. There's a big bolus of teenage white sharks moving up through the population that have probably followed adults or marine mammals up to those sites. But because those areas are fairly small, there's not enough room for some of those teenagers to have adequate hunting opportunities, and the big sharks probably kick them out. So what we've been expecting is that we should start seeing larger white sharks down further south. So that is exactly what we're seeing. So we're seeing more subadult and some adult white sharks down off the Channel Islands and the south central coast from Morro Bay to Point Conception. In addition, what we've seen is that a lot of elephant seal rookeries have been marching further south as well. While there's very large rookeries out off the Farallones, or excuse me, not the Farallones, but northern Channel Islands, so Santa Rosa and San Miguel, we're also starting to see those fill in along that south central coast. So this provides new hunting or feeding aggregation sites for these subadult and adult white sharks. So we're starting to see what we think is a displacement or a spreading of the population as it grows. So with more rookeries, new feeding opportunities, so this is something that along the stretch of the coast, we historically haven't seen that many white sharks. We know they're there, we know they pass through, but now we might start seeing phenomena more akin to what we see at the Farallones and Año Nuevo. In addition, the other indicator of this is we've seen a dramatic rise in sea otter mortality over the last 15 years, particularly along the stretch of the coast. So this was a study done by Tim Tinker. And if you look at these dates here, this is 85 to 99, you can see these are areas of hotspot mortalities by white sharks on sea otters. So you can see there are hot spots and cold spots. When we get down to kind of Cambria through Pismo Beach, we see it was cold in the 85 through 99. But now we get up to 2007 to 2013, we see there are not only hot spots north of Santa Monica, Monterey Bay, but now these areas between Cambria and Point Conception have turned into hotspots. So we think that's because there are more larger juveniles and subadults that are looking for new feeding opportunities. And of course, a smart, well-fed adult white shark that's very well trained to take down good, healthy elephant seals probably knows the difference between a sea otter and an elephant seal. So we think it probably is naive individuals learning how to take marine mammals for the first time. Sea otters become an easy target. Unfortunately, there's no reward. It's like eating a hairball. So they're not getting that fatty, rich blubber layer that the other seals have. So in any event, we think that this might be a contributor to some of this mortality, this rising population, this spread of white sharks along this part of the coast. In addition, since 2018, we've learned that there are white sharks that like to hang out at the Diablo Canyon power plant. So since 2018, we've managed to tag 18 sharks there. They range anywhere from about 7.5 feet long to about 12 feet long. So from large, intermediate sized juveniles to full-grown adults. And what's really interesting is we have acoustic receivers, and we've tagged them there, working with Mike Harris from the Department of Fish and Wildlife. He's the sea otter expert there. And he really wants to figure out what they're doing along that central part of the coast to see, are they feeding around sea otter habitat? So what's interesting is we found that these sharks that we've tagged in Diablo Canyon spend a lot of time there, weeks to months. But when they do leave, many of them will go as far north as Santa Cruz or as far south as Guadalupe Island and then return the next year. So one of our hypotheses is this area where the power plant discharges warm water might actually provide them with a thermal refuge, a little spa, if you will. So even adults can handle water temperatures easily around those areas It's nice to be able to warm up. They might actually save some energy and be able to grow faster. So here's, we have a receiver up off Stero. We have one off Diablo Canyon, which we call the spa. And then we have one off Pismo. So what you can see are these little dots indicate detections of different sharks that we've tagged over the time. So what you can basically detect is that these sharks at the spa, some of those sharks are there for weeks or months at a time, particularly during winter months. And then during the summer, they tend to disappear. We've even had a shark that was tagged as a baby in Mexico in Vizcaino Bay that's come up. And what's really cool is we see it hanging out off of Stero. So there's a lot more shark activity up off that south central part of the coast than we've been paying attention to, and we're trying to up our game there, get more receivers out there. But as many of you know, it is not an easy, hospitable coast to work along. So we're trying to find places to put receivers where they'll be protected and safe. And that's a little challenging to do. So coming back to the babies, one of the big questions we get in Southern California is, why do they use the beaches? Why are they so close to the beach? And the thing that we have to remind people is that, you know, these moms give birth to the babies and they are completely on their own. So these things are basically naive. They don't know what a predator is. They don't even know they're a white shark yet. So we believe that one of the safest places for them to be is in shallow water. And the shallower water has fewer large predators. So they might instinctively been driven into shallow water because that's a safe place. But just because they're there and it's safe, that doesn't mean they're going to be able to survive there. We find that these young white sharks will spend weeks to months at these aggregation sites, and they have to be feeding. So the other challenge is they basically are incubating in a warm mom, and then they're born potentially in deeper water. We think females are giving birth maybe in the channels in deeper water, and then of course they're a little thermal shock, and that would make them swim to the surface and then maybe head towards the shoreline. But also, they've never experienced a predator, so safest place. They also have to figure out how to feed. And the number one thing we find in juvenile white shark stomachs are stingrays, and we have plenty of those in Southern California. So between round rays and bat rays, there are probably hundreds of thousands of round stingrays along our beaches in Southern California. And they bury in the sand, they're an easy target, and they're an easy food source. So I kind of joke, they're kind of like the all-you-can-eat pancake breakfast for these babies. In addition, the water's warmer along the beach than it is further offshore. So we think those are the three main reasons why the babies are using the beach. Now, the other challenge that we have is we have our acoustic receivers out all along the coast, and a diver has to go pick those up to download them. And of course, when we're working along public beaches in Southern California, the lifeguards want that information right away. Is there a tag shark out off our beach? How do we get this information immediately? And of course, that's difficult because it takes us about 2 months to download all our acoustic receivers throughout the California range that we have. It costs us about $85,000 a year to maintain those receivers. So working with one of the manufacturers, we've developed a new receiver that basically has an acoustic receiver underneath it. It has a cell modem and solar panels. It's got a GPS locator. So this thing, if it gets a detection, if a tag shark swims by one of these buoys, just like one of our underwater receivers, instead of a diver having to pick it up and download it, it will transmit real-time data to the cloud. Our local lifeguards are subscribers to a service. They get a text alert saying, shark number 152 is currently off Huntington Beach and it just swam by the buoy. They can then log into our website and see where that shark has been all along the California coast. So this provides lifeguards with real-time data and an alert service. However, it is not available to the public. And the reason for that is really simple. We can't tag every shark, and it is not an early warning system. It is simply a tool that the lifeguards, along with us scientists, are using to better understand the movement and behavior patterns of these sharks. Then they can apply that information on how they regulate our beach. So eventually, hopefully, if we can get the public educated to that, we'll eventually make this information public in real time, but right now it's only available to lifeguards. In addition, and this always shocks me, is that we really don't know how many people are in the water, how many people are surfing, how many people are swimming, wading, stand-up paddleboarding, boogie boarding, all those activities. And in Southern California, where we have 22 million people, we have some of the most populated beaches in the world. And of course, we have juvenile white shark aggregations at some of those beaches. So one of the studies that we've begun last year is an aerial survey from San Diego to Santa Barbara, where we're flying either helicopters along the coast with video cameras, or we're using drone fleets to do aerial surveys right along the beach. And the purpose of those is to figure out how many white sharks can we see along a beach, how many might be in these aggregations. What are the water users doing and where are they located? Where are they located in proximity to the shoreline? Where are they located in proximity to the wave break? What time of day are they there and under what environmental conditions are they there? And then of course we can take those measurements from those images that we get from the aerial survey. And then we can measure the distance of sharks to those people. So we can use this as a way of beginning to look at encounter rates. And then maybe eventually even a risk assessment. So to do this, I have a grad student who's piloting this project. We've set up a database. We have a server where video footage can be logged. And then we've developed machine learning algorithms to go through, identify all these different water users and measure their distance from the shoreline, from the beach, out to the wave break, and from the wave break out offshore. And then we can count the number of people and then correlate them with shark activity and with weather. So the goal might be eventually in the future, we can say, okay, under these wave conditions, these wind conditions, these sunny solar conditions, you might have a higher probability of encountering a juvenile white shark at this area. So that technology right now is all being employed. We have another year of surveying, and hopefully we'll have a nice study out that will begin to describe this pattern. In addition, we also want to try to figure out why these sharks find a beach and what are they doing at that beach. So to do that, we're throwing every piece of technology we have at it. So when an aggregation of white sharks shows up at one of our beaches, we'll go out, we'll catch and tag as many of the sharks, we'll surgically implant acoustic transmitters, we'll put satellite transmitters in them, we'll be flying our drones, we'll have our radio buoys out. We have an underwater robot that we'll use to run along the beach. So our underwater robot basically can be programmed to do surveys along the beach. It'll basically go out and mow the lawn, and it will move up and down through the water column at different depths. It has temperature sensor, light sensor, depth sensor, chlorophyll sensor, salinity, turbidity, and pH. And it will map those in high resolution. So we have a 3D high resolution map covering about 1.5 miles of beach out to a 1/2 mile offshore. All the sharks that we'll have will be tagged. We'll have an acoustic receiver array out so we can track every individual within that area. And then we'll do surveys where the aggregation is hanging out and outside that aggregation. So we can begin to ask, are the sharks here because the water's warmer here? Or is the water temperature the same on both sides? So are they here for food? So we can also instrument our AUV with underwater cameras. So while it's out doing its surveys, it has a camera pointing down so we can survey along the bottom, count stingrays. It has a camera pointing forward so we can see schools of fish. So we can use that to create prey libraries and look at prey densities along these beaches as well. In addition, some of the sharks will be tagged with our smart tag, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. And then we'll also be taking water samples for eDNA. Okay, so the smart tag we developed several years ago, and it actually works just like a Fitbit. So if we catch a juvenile white shark, and over here is a picture of a white shark being caught in the net, we can take that shark out, put it in a water bath, we can take measurements, take tissue samples for genetics, we can take muscle samples for stable isotope analysis, blood samples, and then we can fit it with a variety of tags. One tag that we use is called our smart tag. So this clamps on the dorsal fin. It's got a 3D accelerometer, a 3D gyroscope, a 3D magnetometer, so we get a compass heading. It's got an acoustic transmitter on it, so we can follow that shark from a boat, or our autonomous robots have also been programmed to track the tagged shark. And it also has a video logger pointing down so we can see what the shark sees. So 2 summers ago, we managed to catch 3 baby white sharks at Belmont Shore right off Long Beach and tag them with a smart tag, and then follow sharks around for 24 hours. What we found was really interesting. When we got one of the packages back, we were looking at the video, it looked like the camera had been jostled, like the camera was on an angle, like a 45-degree angle. So we thought maybe the shark was rubbing on something and banged it. But what was weird is after about 20 minutes, it flipped, it went the other way. So then we were thinking, well, maybe the camera is flopping in the holder. It's not supposed to do that. But it wasn't until we downloaded the acceleration data that we began to realize while we were tracking the shark, it looked like it wasn't going anywhere. It was staying in the same general area. So what we found was sharks were actually swimming in these tight circles, about a 35-foot diameter circle at a bank, just like a plane. So it was banking, and that's why the camera was at a 45-degree angle. So these sharks would be swimming in these circles, tight circles, in one direction for 20 minutes. And then what was really weird is after 20 minutes, we would reverse and go the opposite direction for 20 minutes. And these circles would drift over space, over depth, over time. And then every 20 minutes, it would flip back. And they would do this for about 4 hours. So we had no idea why these sharks were doing this. From a spatial standpoint, when we were tracking them, they really didn't look like they'd gone that far. They looked like they were just milling around in a small spot. So my grad students started looking into it. It turns out that migratory birds, when they fly constantly, will actually turn off half their brain and will fly in a tight circle in one direction, and then turn off their other half of their brain and fly in a tight circle in the other direction. And this way they can continuously fly while they sleep. So for something like a white shark that's in what we call an obligate ram ventilator, it has to swim through the water in order to breathe. This may be the way they actually sleep. So if it wasn't for this technology, measuring things at this high resolution, 30 times a second, we would not have been able to see this pattern. In addition, a couple of years ago, we figured out that we could take a water sample and actually detect white shark DNA in the water. So eDNA is environmental DNA. All living organisms that are in the water slough off cells, and within their cells are their DNA. Now, if you go down and you take a liter of water from the beach, you basically have a giant DNA soup. You've got bacteria and viruses and plankton, all sorts of animals, plants. So you basically have this DNA soup. If you know a species has a species-specific chunk of DNA, you can probe specifically for those pieces of DNA. So that's what we did. We had a group of white sharks tagged off Santa Barbara. We were tracking their behavior, and we were flying drone surveys. And we only detected the sharks here at this area off Santa Claus Lane. But these areas about a half mile down, we never detected white sharks. So my colleagues from UCSB came down and took water samples here. They literally weighed it out and took 1 liter of water. And then we could filter that down and then amplify the DNA and then probe to see if just white shark DNA pieces were in there. And lo and behold, the only places we were able to detect white shark DNA were the places where we were constantly detecting them and monitoring them. So this is really exciting because what it did was it gave us some indication that we might actually be able to use this as a monitoring tool. But before we can get to that, there are a lot of things we still have to answer. How long will that DNA last in the water? How long does it take to degrade and break apart? How far down current will it drift from an aggregation before you can no longer detect it? Can we use it to estimate how many grams or kilograms of white shark is in the water and nearby? So we have all these calibration experiments planned for the summer, and then hopefully if we get a nice aggregation set up, we'll be able to take those water samples and answer that question. If this does work and the DNA is still viable or detectable with only a day or two, then this could really become a really nice monitoring tool. Lifeguards would literally be able to go down, take a water sample, go back and run it through a ddPCR machine in their headquarters and get fairly quick results as to whether there are white shark DNA present in the water or not. So there are lots of cool technology, autonomous vehicles that will water sample and do this for us. In addition, occasionally people are bitten by white sharks. And typically we know in Southern California or California in general, if somebody is bitten by a shark, 9.999 times out of 10, it's going to be a white shark, except during strong El Niños, we'll get tigers and bull sharks coming up from the south, at least into Southern California. So using much the same techniques, we've had a situation where a 13-year-old boy was bitten down off Encinitas. We managed to get his wetsuit. We were able to swab the tooth perforations, and we're able to amplify white shark DNA, confirm that there was white shark DNA in all the tooth perforations. And we believe we can do the same thing from surfboards and boogie boards and things like that. This is really important because what it does is it provides us a tool to conclude what species was involved, because quite often people who are bitten never see the shark that hits them. And in addition, we can also take water samples in those areas to determine whether the shark is present or not. Because right now, the entire white shark genome has been sequenced. And probably within the next 10 years, we'll be able to tell, just by taking water samples, whose babies and whose brothers and sisters were recently at that beach. So this technology is rapidly evolving, and we'll be able to use this for forensic purposes in the future. Okay, so with rising white shark populations, most of us conservation-minded people go, yay, conservation is working, but not everybody. And it's created some new conservation challenges for us. So remember, white sharks are protected. It's illegal for fishers to go out and target them. But what we've been seeing, particularly in Southern California, because the young ones are right off our beaches, is there's been more illegal activity of fishers going out and deliberately targeting white sharks. So in doing this, they're using heavy gear, they're using steel leader, they're using big baits, clearly not fishing for a halibut or, bat rays. They're clearly targeting these white sharks. And of course, this poses a danger to other beachgoers that are using those beaches. So we have confirmation of numerous fishing-related mortalities, but it's very difficult to convict in these cases. In addition, many of these fishers are actually chumming off public beaches, putting hundreds of pounds of tuna in the water. These are off public piers or off public beaches where kids are swimming. It is technically not illegal to chum in California waters, which poses all sorts of problems. So right now we're working to make some modifications to the rules, right? And there's a big difference between using bait and using chum. We're talking about people putting hundreds of pounds of ground up tuna in the water. So this obviously poses a public safety issue. And then of course, the other issue that we've run into is that tourism. When these sharks show up at a beach, they're there for months. Whale watch operators will change their business model and start taking people out to see these white sharks. Unlike whales, which have really strict guidelines in terms of how they can interact with them, there are no guidelines for shark tourism in California. So there have been boats set up, they're right off the beach. Sometimes they're baiting to lure the sharks close so that tourists can take pictures. There are basically no rules. So as shark populations have come back, which is a good thing, it's going to be important for keeping marine mammal populations healthy, interactions with humans are going to go up, and we're going to have to start modifying some of our rules and regulations to accommodate those increasing populations. In addition, we also have a really important outreach responsibility, because with increasing white shark populations, there will be bites on people. That will not stop. It has not increased significantly, even though the population is increasing much faster. But nonetheless, a lot of education is required. So the public really needs to understand what's going on with the shark populations and exactly how risky it is. So this is why it's very important that we couple our science to our outreach. So at Cal State Long Beach Shark Lab, we have 5,000 people tour the lab every year, mainly school kids. We do public presentations. We have something called Shark Shacks. We go out to public beaches and we talk about our technology. We talk about beach safety, which includes sharks and stingrays and other things. But we don't want to scare people about sharks, but we want to educate them. In addition, we've come up with a comic book for beach safety. So this is generated for kind of junior lifeguard age, kind of 9 to 12, where we cover a lot of issues like how to tell the difference between a dolphin dorsal fin and a white shark dorsal fin. And it's meant to be fun. Right now we have about 10,000 copies to give out for this coming summer, and then hopefully next year it'll be fully digital. If anybody's interested, let us know and we'll try to get you some copies. And then we also are working on a second book on marine pollution, which is a sequel to this. The kids loved it so much, we decided to do a second one. In addition, we work very closely with lifeguards in Southern California. They are literally on the front lines. They have to deal with shark sightings on a daily basis in the summer, and they have to deal with the public. And many of our lifeguards, while they're some of the best lifeguards in the world, are not marine scientists. So they have a hard time identifying much of the marine life, and they're responsible for dealing with sightings that the public bring to them. So we've developed a training program for them. So it's a PowerPoint presentation. My students go out to all the lifeguards during their training sessions, and we teach them how to identify not just different types of marine life, but also identify behavior. So for example, if a surfer got out of the water and said, hey, I just saw this juvenile white shark and it was swimming like this, lifeguards would know, okay, that's not a worry. That's a very chill white shark right there. That's not acting aggressively at all. So the goal is to educate them so that they can better interact with the public, but also make important decisions when it comes time to decide whether a beach needs to be closed or signs need to be posted. In addition, because of the bycatch issue, we've developed a fisher education program. So we have a PSA. You can take a snapshot of that QR code right there if you want to watch the video. So basically, our goal is to educate recreational fishers about the fact that there are juvenile white sharks off these beaches, how to avoid catching them, how to identify them, what to do if you should catch one safely. And of course, we're working with many of the local cities to get signs up on the piers and beaches so that we can educate people so that they can be safe while they're fishing. We also have a shark jaw program. So couple of years ago, U.S. Fish and Wildlife came to us. They have an import center in Los Angeles. And they said, we have a shipment of shark jaws that are being imported from Asia to the curio markets in the U.S. All the shark jaws were labeled bull sharks, but when the wardens opened up the boxes, they said the shark jaws looked different, but they couldn't tell. They couldn't identify them. So they brought the jaws to us. So my wife, who's also a marine biologist, she and some grad students went through 5,000 shark jaws. That's how many were being imported in the US. And it turns out that there were 6 species of CITES protected species in there. Only 2% of all the 5,000 were actually bull sharks, and there were 21 species of other sharks. So when we asked U.S. Fish and Wildlife what they were going to do, they said, well, we're going to talk to the importers and they can either forfeit the shipment or we'll fine them for every CITES species. And it turns out that the shippers elected to forfeit the shipment. So we asked them what they were going to do and they were going to have them destroyed. And we asked them not to do that. So we developed an education program. So what we've been able to do is send out shark jaws to school programs. We've developed a curriculum that goes with that. It's free. You can download it on the Shark Lab website. And then we have a wide range of species so kids can start looking at different tooth morphologies and begin to identify these to different species. We even have some engineering lessons that kind of go with that. So we're expecting another big shipment that's been forfeited, and we'll have more shark jaws to give out. We don't like to keep them here because it takes up a lot of space. So if anybody's interested, feel free to email me. So in addition, right now we've developed a lot of computing infrastructure. There's a need for greater data. There's a lot of public interest in this. Everybody has a cell phone or a GoPro. So probably in the next year, we'll be developing a website or an app where if you take a picture or you shoot some video of a shark, you'll be able to upload it to the server. It'll use machine learning to go through and help identify the shark. And then you'll be able to see where shark sightings have occurred along the coast. So it gives us an opportunity to use kind of citizen science to help us better understand how shark populations might be expanding along the California coast. Yes, so we've invested a lot in computer technology, and I have programmers and database developers helping us with that. So right now we have funding from the state of California to do this work. Monterey Bay Aquarium was a big supporter, AltaSea, lots of small private donors. We have lots of research and education partners. And of course, pretty much all the Southern California cities are our partners. So we're looking to expand, especially up north. We've been talking with Port St. Louis and some of those other areas about joining forces with us and helping us with some in-kind support so we can expand our coverage up into the south central part of California. So with that,